Welcome to another episode of 9 to 5 Mac Weekly, where I was definitely going to show off my new 9 to 5 merch, but it still got that new weird shirt smell, so I gotta wash it first. I'm your host, Miles Somerville, and we've got some interesting new details on the upcoming slate of entry-level Macs that are supposedly gonna release sometime this year, and it should be some good stuff. The presumed name for the successor to the entry-level Apple Silicon products is M2, but with Apple, who knows what it'll actually be called, honestly. And what's going to be different about M2 that M1 currently isn't offering? Well, we don't have all the details just yet, but we do note that this chip should be based on TSMC's 4nm process. M1 chips are currently using a 5nm process, and so the smaller the nanometer fabrication process, the less space there is between the transistors on the die, so we can at the very least expect notably improved efficiency across the board. It's pretty safe to say we can expect improved performance over M1, but by how much, we don't really know. It'll also be interesting to see how M2 compares to M1 Pro and M1 Max, because even though M1 Pro and Max are performance-oriented chips, there could be leaps and bounds made in the performance front through this new M2 chip, and assuming they make an M2 Pro and M2 Max chip down the line, that probably isn't something we'll see till 2023 at the earliest. But I personally wouldn't expect the M2 to blow M1 Pro and Max chips out of the water in terms of performance. I think it's just going to be a good performer, but with a higher emphasis on the efficiency side of things. So for our MacBook Pro and Air with M2, we can surely expect improved battery life. Not that it desperately needs it though or anything like that. And that brings us to the report we got this Sunday morning from Bloomberg. According to Mark Gurman, we can expect an M2 powered MacBook Pro this year in 2022, which is exciting. And he also states that there's an M2 powered 24-inch iMac refresh, entry-level Mac Mini, and then that long-rumored MacBook Air with the redesign in the pipeline as well. And based on leakers' claims at the beginning of the year that this would be the craziest year for Apple hardware in history, I wouldn't be surprised if we got more than one M2 product this year. As far as specifics on the M2 MacBook Pro, Gurman firstly says that we can expect a redesign that'll more closely match the new flagship MacBook Pros, but they're of course going to be removing some features to separate the two. So although we can expect the same keyboard layout as what we've got on the new Pros, there's of course going to be no touch bar, and with this release, the touch bar will officially be gone for good. Gurman also reports that we can expect lesser displays and that we won't be getting ProMotion or Mini LED on this model. And I think that makes perfect sense given the price range this MacBook is likely to sit in, but since this 13-inch is going to be redesigned, it can't just use the exact same panel that's currently on the 13-inch, so it sounds like they'll be developing a new panel for this entry-level Pro that is probably on the same level as the Retina display on the 13-inch just to fit this new chassis. And MacBooks have always had some of the best laptop displays out there, so I don't think anyone should be complaining about this. But this display tidbit is interesting because the M2 MacBook Air that we've been hearing whispers of for a while now has been rumored to come with a Mini LED display, but no ProMotion. And so how are we going to have a MacBook Pro with Mini LED, but the Air gets it? That's pretty odd. And hopefully things make more sense soon as to why Apple would make this decision. Perhaps this MacBook Air with Mini LED will be the flagship Air, and there will be a model that retains the LCD display. We'll just have to see. But that's more or less all we've got on the M2 MacBook Pro details, and assuming this comes in at the $1,300 to $1,500 range, I think this will be a fairly decent buy, assuming this MacBook also retains all the return ports and everything outside of that ProMotion display. I think this could be a great middle ground product for the users who don't necessarily need all the M1 Pro and M1 Max horsepower. But as Gurman said in this report, we can also expect an M2 powered iMac and Mac Mini. As far as when we'll see them, that kind of remains unclear, but I'm also struggling to picture when Apple will drop these two products within the 2022 timeline, because they still have yet to reveal the flagship Mac Mini and iMac, which presumably will be powered by beefed up M1 Pro and Max chips. And so for the Mac Mini, it's hard to say whether this M2 version will be redesigned to match the model of the flagship, or if it'll just be an internal refresh of the current M1 Mini. The entry-level iMac is probably going to stick with its current design for a while, so I imagine that'll literally just be an M2 swapped M1 iMac as far as general flashiness. But it seems like that redesigned M2 MacBook Air is going to bring most of the new changes with that redesign, and I think out of all of these Macs, the M2 MacBook Pro and Air are probably the surest to launch this year, especially the M2 Air, as we've heard so much about it in the past year or so. But what Apple Silicon Mac are you excited to see this year? For me, I think it's still that flagship iMac. I think that big old mini LED panel is gonna be sweet. But let us know your thoughts in the comments below. John Hillier says, has anyone felt that over the years Apple's product line has come to experience bloat and lack of direction? There's too much choices if they were trying to satisfy everyone. There's been improvements in hardware like their new silicon, and at the software level, but it's like their teams are stretched thin, trying to hit their mark on every product release on tight timelines. If they could cut their Mac line in half and reduce the number of iPad models offered, they could then focus their R&D on things that would matter to consumers and businesses. It would be interesting to see what Apple would be able to accomplish and how they would be able to shape the future. That's an interesting comment. I, for one, don't think that Apple is bloating up their product line. I think, especially on the Mac side of things, I think things are fairly tight now as opposed to in the past where they kind of had like really random products like the non-touch bar MacBook Pro with the dual core processor and stuff like that. I think they're really tightening up the Mac hardware line in a way that's going to be really nice once it's finally finished, and it seems like we're going to have an entry-level and flagship version of every product. We're going to get this mini LED MacBook Air, so perhaps we'll retain an LCD model as the entry-level version. We're going to get this new flagship Mac Mini with the redesign, and probably still have that M1 version as the entry-level model, and same thing with the MacBook Pro, same thing with the upcoming iMac. So I think the Mac product line in particular is really tightening up in the past year or so, and I think the silicon transition has been a huge cause of that. So to be honest, I kind of disagree for the most part. I feel as though, at least on the computing side of things, they've had more direction and focus than they've had in a while. Think about products that they were just leaving on the shelf, never updating, like the Mac Mini that wasn't updated from 2014 all the way to like 2018, products like that. I think they're really starting to give every product the focus it needs, and I think that's a good thing. Sandus says, the future of Mac looks bright again. I agree. They just want Apple to hurry up and finish the transition, or he wants Apple to hurry up and finish the transition. Recent rumors of no new iMac Pro this spring are depressing. And yeah, I think it is a little sad that there's going to be no iMac Pro this spring. Allegedly, we'll still see. There could be one next month, but I'm willing to wait, especially if the product's going to be good. Just like this 14-inch MacBook Pro sitting right here in front of me. We had to wait a while for this thing to come to fruition, but now that we've got it, I think it's, it's pretty much everything that we could have wanted from a general laptop. 2012 R MacBook Pro Master Race says, I'd love to see a 16-inch MacBook Pro capable of handling 2 external 120Hz monitors, plus a TV with a non-mini LED display, but still 120Hz Retina screen to keep the price down. Well, it doesn't seem like we're going to be getting promotion on this entry-level MacBook Pro, so we're probably just going to get the LCD and a 60Hz panel, unfortunately. But he also says, before anyone chimes in, it's not about games. Everything about using a system is smoother on 120Hz. UI animations, mouse movement, scrolling, etc. It's disappointing that the industry hasn't been moving forward towards Retina plus 120Hz. And I think it's just because it isn't something that, it's one of those things that users, especially casual users who aren't like techies, don't realize that they're missing until they've got it. Anyone who doesn't follow tech closely or really care about tech that much besides its utilitarian purposes, I don't think they're clamoring for a higher refresh rate display, especially on their smartphone when they're just doing things like scrolling through emails and web browsing anyway. So I think it's just one of those things that manufacturers have to push. And once that's happened, I think people will slowly start to realize, hey, 120Hz after using it for a few months straight kind of makes 60Hz look choppy. So eventually everything should kind of look like this. I think that consumer mindset will start to take place after a little while, but it's kind of got to happen on the manufacturer side first. Tim says, I still don't really get the point of this middle step MacBook Pro. It's so close to the MacBook Air and has barely an advantage because of this fan, and everything else is basically the same. Well, I think you really need to keep in mind ergonomics, the size, shape, and feel. One of the things that many people love about the MacBook Air is how light and thin it is, and when I upgraded to this MacBook Pro from the M1 MacBook Air that I was using as my daily laptop, that was the very first thing I noticed, how heavier this thing is. Not that it's unbearable or a problem per se, but I think the general MacBook Air body style, that thinness, that lightness, that is something that's desired by a lot of people, and a lot of people would maybe prefer that over the horsepower that comes with the MacBook Pro. And I do understand that it is kind of weird as far as performance, just because the MacBook Air and MacBook Pro, at least on the entry-level side, are going to be using the same chip, so there's barely going to be a performance gain on that MacBook Pro. So I think it really comes down to whether consumers want that thin and light experience with the power or just a pure focus on performance. But as I said in the last 9 to 5 Mac Weekly, we're expecting a new Mac product to launch at an event next month, so it could be any of these 4 new Macs that I've mentioned in this video, and I wouldn't be surprised if it was either the new Air or a refreshed entry-level Pro, but we'll see pretty soon. So if you want to follow along with us, be sure to subscribe to the channel and give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed. Thanks for watching, and I'll talk to you guys in the next one.